On GED Social Studies, you may have to determine who's in one of the branches of U.S. government. For instance, who's in the judicial branch. But notice this word kind of looks like judge, and this is going to be really helpful. Which group best represents members of the judicial branch? It actually is made up of judges in courtrooms. And it has that. Individuals serving as judges, that's exactly who makes up the judicial branch here. But we could also use the context clues to help. Let's go ahead and read it. The judicial power of the United States shall be vested or given in one Supreme Court. Let's highlight that. Anytime you see court, that's where legal decisions happen. You've got lawyers involved and judges. So again, that definitely seems to fit here. And powers given to inferior or lesser courts as well. Basically, they keep mentioning this word court. And if you ever watch court TV, you use your time wisely, then you know all about Judge Judy. She's the boss, applesauce. But every court has to have a judge. So the judicial branch, they mention it's got courts involved. It definitely has judges involved. So that's the correct option here. But what about lawmakers? Well, they're part of a different branch of government. We'll look at those later. And same with the military and law enforcement. These are part of a third branch of government. Okay, so now we know what the judicial is all about. Let's go ahead and check out another branch here. This time we're given the president. Which branch of the U.S. government is described here? In other words, what branch is the president a part of? Let's just jump to the answers. Judicial. Well, we already know that this has to do with courtroom judges, and the president is not a courtroom judge. So the first one, that's no good. Okay, B, executive. But let's look at this word more closely. The executive of a company, they're basically the leader of the company, the person making all the important decisions. And that is what the president does. They're basically the leader of the government. So therefore, they are part of the executive branch. That describes what the president does. They're the leader or kind of the CEO of the company. By the way, that word even means chief executive officer. So it has the word executive in it. But this is the branch of government that the president is part of. And this passage tells us the president shall be commander-in-chief. The commander-in-chief is the head of the army and navy, or the leader of the military. So again, they're the leader in multiple ways there. Okay, the legislative, that is a third branch of government. They're in charge of passing laws. We'll check them out soon. And then checks and balances. Well, that's not a branch of government, so we'll get rid of that. But that has to do with balancing power between these three branches here. Okay, let's look at a question about the legislative. What's that all about? This tells us Congress is the lawmaking branch of the U.S. government. So the branch of government in charge of making laws, that's what Congress is a part of. And another name for that is the legislative. All right, but the question here is which power is granted to Congress in this excerpt? Let's go ahead and read it and see. The Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes. So one of their powers looks to be collecting taxes. What else? And provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States. Basically, provide services for the general welfare of citizens and the U.S. So again, which power is granted to Congress in this excerpt? The first one, interpreting if laws are broken. Well, they don't really mention anything about specific laws being broken or needing to be interpreted, so the first one doesn't sound right. The next one, resolving international disputes. That's like conflicts between different countries. They don't mention anything about that either, so probably not. The third one, raising revenue for national needs. Well, they do talk about raising revenue, same thing as raising money. You could do that by collecting taxes. And they're trying to address national needs because they're trying to provide for the general welfare of the U.S. here. So both of these things seem to be what Congress does, raise money to provide certain needs for the nation. And C, that is the correct option. Because the last one, formally changing the Constitution, maybe Congress has the power to do this, but they don't mention changing the Constitution here either, so it's not the last one. But what are some of the national needs that they would need money for? Well, there's a bunch. For instance, public health care, that needs to be funded with taxpayer money, or public education, public roads, buildings, bridges, all that stuff. Basically, Congress, they're going to collect taxes, then they're going to vote on laws of how to distribute that money. So which of these things should get the most amount of money, and so on. So C, this definitely is one of their powers. Okay, we have enough now that we can identify all three branches of government and who's in them. Let's do it. So let's drag each term underneath the correct branch of government here. We'll start with the executive branch. We know that the executive of a company, that's the leader of the company, and the leader of the government is the president. So that'll go right there. Next, we've got the judicial branch. We know that has the word judge in it. We'll put that. And every judge, they preside in a courtroom, just like our beloved Judge Judy. So the Supreme Court, that's part of the judicial branch. Next, the legislative. Well, there's only one left over. So Congress, they're part of the legislative branch. And Congress, they're in charge of passing laws and deciding how the public's money should be spent. Okay, what do judges do? Do they interpret the law or enforce the law? Well, it seems like both, but if you think about a judge declaring somebody guilty or not, they're really interpreting the law to see if somebody broke it. So the judicial branch or judges are in charge of interpreting the law. So that leaves the executive branch in charge of enforcing the law. But does the president really enforce laws? Well, not really, but that's where the executive branch, it's actually much bigger. It's made up of the FBI, the CIA, basically any three-letter acronym you can think of is part of the executive branch. The FBI enforces that people don't break laws throughout the country, or environmental laws with the EPA. And the FDA, that's the Food and Drug Administration, they make sure that people are following laws that pertain to food and drugs. So all these organizations, they do enforce different laws here. And finally, we haven't talked much about the legislative branch, but Congress is actually broken up into two parts. It's made up of representatives and senators. So let's look at a question talking about these two. We'll go ahead and read it. U.S. lawmakers consist of the House of Representatives. Let's highlight this. Anytime you see representatives, they're talking about the House of Representatives. That's made up of 435 members. Okay, and then we've also got the Senate or senators. There's 100 members there, and there's 2 per state. We've got 50 states total, so 50 times 2, that's where the 100 of those comes from. So far, so good. Now, this map is showing us the number of U.S. representatives by state. So how are the representatives distributed here? Well, it looks kind of random, but over here, California has 52 of them. That's actually the most compared to any other state. And Texas, that one has 38 representatives. But then you've got a state like Alaska, and poor Alaska, it's only got 1 representative. All right, so we've got the main idea here. Let's jump to the question. What inference, an inference is a guess at what's true, is supported by the information and the map here? Let's check it out. A, each state has the same number of representatives. Well, let's look at that, because the map is showing us the representatives, but each state, well, it definitely doesn't have the same number of representatives. Because like we said, California, that's got 52, and Texas has 38. So A, that's not true. They don't have the same number. Okay, B, states with larger populations have more representatives. Well, there are more representatives in certain states, and those are the ones with larger populations, actually, because a lot of people live in California, Texas, Florida, and New York, and those are the states with the most representatives. So B, there's definitely evidence to support this, and that is the correct inference here. So senators, there's 2 per state. So no matter what, every state has 2 of them. But the representatives, they're definitely broken up based on population here. And by the way, these numbers can change as the populations of states shift around here. Okay, let's go ahead and tie all these concepts together with one last problem. Which principle of US government does this describe? Now, they mention a couple things here: the President, the Supreme Court, and the Senate. They're actually mentioning all 3 branches of government: the executive, the judicial, and the legislative. And anytime they mention 2 or 3 branches of government, they're almost always talking about checks and balances. That's basically talking about balancing power between the 3 branches. So let's see how it's being used here. The president nominates a Supreme Court judge, but the Senate can reject the nomination if it fails to receive majority approval. So the president is trying to nominate a Supreme Court judge, but before it's approved, the Senate, the 100 senators, they're going to vote on it. And if a majority do approve, then, it goes through. But if not, they can reject that nomination. And this definitely puts a check or a limit on the president's power, because the president needs the approval of the Senate to make this important decision. In other words, there's definitely a balance of power happening. So D, this is the correct one. So like we said, anytime the question asks you about 2 or 3 branches of government, it almost always has to do with checks and balances. In other words, needing approval from one branch of government to be able to do something. So there we go. Here's a video on GED Social Studies vocabulary and terms to practice more of those. Check out my website for practice problems just like these and all 4 GED subjects as well. Let me know what questions you have, what else you want me to cover. Good luck, you got these. We'll see you in the next video. Toodles.